Please start.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Myself, Dr. Abhijit Malvi. I am medical advisor at Intas Pharmaceutical Limited. Being a science-driven pharmaceutical company, Intas is always at the forefront in providing educational platforms. During this time of social distancing, webinar is the best platform for getting knowledge from experts. With immunocompromised status and physiological adaptive changes during pregnancy, pregnant women could be more susceptible to COVID-19 infection than general population. As COVID-19 is rapidly spreading, maternal management and fetal safety become a major concern. But there is a scarce information on assessment and management of pregnant women infected with COVID-19. Our webinar topic is in the same line, that is COVID and Gravid. And experts with us are Dr. Shivani Sachdev Gaur and Dr. Nupur Gaur. Dr. Shivani Sachdev Gaur is a consultant gynecologist, fertility specialist at SCI IVF New Delhi and Noida, founder secretary of Delhi chapter of ISAR, and Dr. Nupur Garg is a consultant gynecologist, fertility specialist at SCI IVF New Delhi and Noida. If you have any question during the presentation, please type them into the question box on your screen. We will bring them up after the presentation. Now, without further delay, I will turn the time over to our experts for the webinar. Over to you, madam.
Thank you very much, Abhijit, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to everybody for joining us today for this presentation for COVID and Gravid. I'm Dr. Shivani Sachdev Gaur.
And I'm Dr. Nupur Gaur.
And we will be taking you through some of the aspects as Dr. Abhijit has mentioned. Now, out of all the things that we could have possibly imagined, I think none of us ever in our dreams could have imagined that we would have to practice in the times of a pandemic situation. So the key points that we are going to discuss today in the presentation, they include
introduction, virology and epidemiology, clinical manifestation, prevention, post pregnancy, approach to diagnosis, prenatal care.
Sorry, ma'am, your voice is not audible. Please.
Management of labor and delivery, postpartum care, abortion, MTP, ectopic pregnancy, and health worker chemoprophylaxis.
Where did this all start? Coronaviruses are a family of enveloped single-stranded RNA viruses. They cause mild symptoms like common cold. At the end of 2019, a novel coronavirus was identified in a worker suffering from pneumonia in the Wuhan food market in the Hubei province of China. It was observed that this strain exhibited a very strong virulence. It quickly passed from humans to humans, so that in January 2020, World Health Organization designated this disease as a public health emergency. It designated this virus as the 2019 novel coronavirus. And later, the virus was renamed as SARS-CoV-2, which means Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2. Earlier, this was called as 2019 nCoV, and now it is called as SARS-CoV-2. The reason why I put this up is because there are so many terminologies which are going on, that what is COVID-2, SARS, and what is COVID-19, what is the difference between them? So COVID-19 is the pandemic which started, the epidemic or the pandemic which started in 2019, and SARS-CoV-2 is the actual name of the virus.
So coronavirus has always had a very notorious past history. It has caused two epidemics in past also. So basically there are four families of coronavirus: alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Beta is the most common one which causes the severe form of infection. So in 2002, the coronavirus which caused a severe acute respiratory syndrome was named as SARS-CoV. In 2012, there was an epidemic which was called Middle East Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus, also called MERS-CoV. And now in 2019, it was named as SARS-CoV-2, because as the genome sequencing of this novel coronavirus was done, it was found that it shared 79.5% identity with SARS-CoV. And it uses the same receptor, which is angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptors, as SARS-CoV to infect humans. So they designated as Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2. And earlier it was, as already told, it was called as 2019 nCoV. And they suggested that the viral mutation could be the reason of this potential disease relapse. So in February 2020, WHO designated the disease COVID-19, which stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019. So this is the transmission cycle of SARS-CoV-2. This virus that is SARS-CoV-2, basically its original natural host is bat. And because the humans don't usually come in contact with bats, it was assumed that the transmission to humans was through an intermediate host. The virus was transmitted from bats to an intermediate host. It could be a domestic animal. The suggested animals which could have transmitted it to humans were turtles, pangolins, and then from humans to other humans, it was transmitted through droplet spread. So this is how earlier it was suggested that in China, because there is a lot of seafood market, so they suggested maybe it was due to consumption of seafood. But later it was known that it could be either due to consumption of the wild animals or direct contact with through an intermediate host that the humans got infected.
And this thing spread a lot that it is because of fish and animals. So even a lot of non-vegetarian food was avoided here in India. But as we see, the routes of transmission is mainly through droplets. So droplets are small particles. They don't linger in the air, don't travel more than 2 meters. Although the coronavirus has been detected in blood and stool, according to WHO Joint China report, the fecal-oral transmission does not appear to be a significant factor in the spread of infection.
So, the major pathogenesis behind this coronavirus causing such severe infection is it enters or infects the respiratory epithelium by two modes. That is, one is, as already discussed, the receptor, angiotensin converting enzyme receptor 2, or it directly fuses with the respiratory epithelium. This receptor is also found in other organs like lungs, kidney, GI tract, and vascular endothelium. So once the coronavirus fuses or binds to this receptor, it enters and uses the host cell machinery to replicate itself. And during this process of replication, there is more and more cell injury. Apart from this, the normal human defense mechanism is to destroy this virus by releasing excessive, they release inflammatory cytokines. So this release of inflammatory cytokines was shown to be excessive, leading to a cytokine kind of storm. And this cytokine storm lead to extensive tissue damage, exudate production, and mucus plugging of bronchioles, which led to ventilation perfusion mismatch and pneumonia. The main cytokine which was found to be leading to this storm was interleukin 6.
Now there is some new studies which are coming, which are also actually saying that the heme component is displaced, and because of that it is causing tissue damage, and that's why patients on ventilator are not responding so well. So I think this is a very evolving theory that we have right now. And the acute respiratory distress syndrome in this infection is characterized by hypoxemia, respiratory failure, bilateral infiltrates due to diffuse alveolar damage associated with a ventilation perfusion mismatch, pulmonary shunting, unable to successfully ventilate the patient. The septic shock is a form of a peripheral shock where there is vasodilatation and multiple organ dysfunction. Mostly the kidneys are involved. The symptoms that you find are shortness of breath, pneumonia, septic shock, renal failure, diarrhea, fever, headache, hemoptysis, cough, myalgia. Any one of these symptoms or multiple could be present. And there are certain specific underlying health conditions which increase susceptibility, such as hypertension, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease.
So disease severity has been categorized into 3 main: mild, severe, and critical. Mild, where there is no or mild pneumonia. Severe, there is more than 50% lung involvement, which can be seen in an imaging. And critical is with respiratory failure, shock, and multi-organ dysfunction. So the good thing is the critical thing is seen only 5% of cases, and 80% of the cases are mainly mild. Mortality estimates which has been found is approximately 0.25 to 3%, with the severe mortality rate seen in elderly population of more than 80 years, and other susceptible population also show high mortality like cardiovascular disease patients and diabetic patients.
What is the risk of infection in pregnant women? So when we were preparing this presentation, we have gone through guidelines given by the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists. We have gone through Canadian guidelines, the American guidelines, guidelines by the Australian Society, ASRM, National Ministry of Health and Family Welfare guidelines, even local state guidelines. like from New Delhi, from Kerala. So we have gone through a comprehensive set of guidelines, and wherever we found that the points were most well described and relevant, that is what we have put up in our presentation today. Now, what is the risk of infection in pregnant women? RCOG has one of the best publications on this. It is said that pregnancy does not increase the risk to contact the infection as compared to the general population. So, Abhijit, here I'm going to disagree with you as per the RCOG. But at the same time, I agree with you that pregnancy alters the body's immune system. It can cause more severe symptoms with COVID-19. And this is particularly true towards the end of the pregnancy, specifically after 28 weeks of pregnancy. So the precautions that all pregnant women should take, and this is as per our Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and FOXI GCPR, they include social distancing, which now we understand is at least 1 meter, avoiding unnecessary visits outside home, avoiding contact with people who are suffering from any form of viral illness, practicing a strict hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene with avoiding touching the face, and trying to work from home.
So because of this COVID pandemic going on, there has been some changes made in the routine ANC care. And so we have gone through, as already told by Dr. Shivani, several guidelines, and the recommendations as per the guidelines are. So there has been a change. So the basic principles of all the guidelines have been that routine antenatal visits should be kept minimal, and more consultation should be encouraged on phone or video conferencing. And patients should be advised to come alone or keep the number of people accompanying to one. And they should follow all the principles of hand hygiene. They should all wear mask at all the time, gloves, frequent hand sanitization, both pre and post visit. So there, according to the maternal fetal medicine guidance for COVID-19, they suggested that the routine antenatal visits, before 12 weeks of pregnancy, if a patient contacts you, then on phone consultation, patient should be advised the medications. But at 12 weeks, a person should visit the clinic in person and dating and anti-scan should be combined in one visit as a one ultrasound. Then second visit should be in person at 20 weeks, and it should be both for consultation as well as anatomy ultrasound. Then third visit they suggested is at 28 weeks in-person visit. This should include Tdap injection if ROGAM is required. Then lab work should also be ordered, and patient should be given kick counts handout, so that they can monitor the fetal kick counts at home itself. Then at 32 weeks, according to the guidance, they said that in low risk patients need not visit at 32 weeks, but in high risk patients, especially like PIH, preeclampsia patients, patients should be advised to monitor their blood pressure at home. They should be advised to purchase either that blood pressure cuff, and kick count handouts should be done. And at this point also, if the patient is high risk, a cesarean section scheduling can be done. Then 36 weeks, another in-person OB visit is advised for testing for HIV, group B streptococcal infection. Then follow-up of the patient who have been advised home BP monitoring. Again, kick count handouts should be, and patient should be asked whether she is perceiving adequate fetal movement counts. If patient is planning for an induction or cesarean section, then patient counseling, appropriate counseling can be done. And then we can, at 36 weeks, we can offer weekly tele consultation to the patient until delivery. So 38 weeks in-person visit only if there is no BP monitoring available at home for the patient. Then again, postpartum, they are suggesting that again, teleconsultation should be done and no need to visit at person.
There was a question from Dr. Bharti Saran, and she was asking about this ROGAM, which is at 28 weeks, that it can reduce the immunity. But as we are seeing in the maternal fetal medicine guidelines, if the patient has indicated like RH negative, then ROGAM can be given, and we should not think about worry about the immunity status for that.
So there are other suggestions which are given. The consultants who are doing 50-gram glucose challenge test followed by 100-gram glucose challenge test, for those it is recommended that you do only one step 75-gram 2-hour GTP. Then if it is not possible for the patient to visit for NT scan, and if the patient is in quarantine or in isolation, then cell-free DNA screening can be suggested at 10 weeks. So it will be rather than a combined test. Similarly, teleconsultation, home BP monitoring, fetal kick counts. Plus, they also suggest that the patient before visiting, you should do a phone triage. That means ask the patient on phone itself, screen for the symptoms on phone. If they have any history suggestive of fever, cough, or any history of contact with a positive patient or a history of international travel, so accordingly guide them for further management. So this is very important. Phone triage, screening on phone.
So before you give the appointment to the patient, you will do a triage on the phone and then book them in for the appointment, so that if they have any of these history at 12 weeks, you can do a cell-free DNA instead of doing an inpatient visit.
So these are some of the MFM guidance. They have suggested that timing and frequency of growth ultrasound in pregnancy. So here, if you see, a chart has been made and it has been divided into weeks. Recommended growth scans at 28 weeks, 32 weeks, 36 weeks, and then the frequency. So if the patient is having current preeclampsia or gestational hypertension, such patients should be advised for growth scans at 28 weeks, 32 weeks, and 36 weeks. That is, the frequency should be at every 4 weeks. And similarly, the same routine can be followed for patients who have IUGR, prior unexplained intrauterine fetal death, multiple, then pre-gestational diabetes. So these are the cases where they recommend every 4-week growth scan. But for the patients who have like chronic hypertension on medication, then it can be done at 28 weeks and 36 weeks. If the chronic hypertensive patient is not on medication, then only once is enough. Then similarly, same routine for gestational diabetic patient, lupus, sickle cell disease, chronic kidney disease, organ transplant patient, cardiac disease, history of any history, prior history of IUGR or small for gestation age. So if these patients, no need to repeat it every 4 weeks, you can just do it every 8 weeks. Then in patient who have like thyroid disease, any history of substance abuse, tobacco, advanced maternal age, and chronic hypertension off medication, abdominal placentation, or uterine fibroid, only one scan at 32 weeks is enough. So now they have also given recommendations for NST according to the in the current pandemic issues. There has been changes in that. So in this, if you see the table, you will see that there are 4 columns basically given. So the first and second column, gestational age to begin, and then the frequency has been given. These are the routine what we do. And then in the red, these are the recommendations for currently in the COVID situation. So in a patient who is of advanced maternal age, normally what we do is we start the NST at 36 weeks of gestation, and we do it once per week. But in COVID pandemic scenario, patients should do fetal kick counts instead of NST. And the beginning is same as 36 weeks. And they should do it daily. They can do it daily. Then in patient of cholestasis, at the time of diagnosis, every per week. So there has been no change in the recommendation. If a patient is diagnosed with cholestasis, you have to follow the same. There has been no change in that. If patient is diagnosed with, if patient comes with decreased fetal movement count, so normally what we do is we advise NST every week from the beginning of diagnosis. So here they're saying in COVID pandemic, you do NST only once, that's it. If a pre-gestational diabetic patient, then if it is then start at 32 weeks, and then you do it once weekly. If it is diagnosed at 36 weeks, then you do it twice weekly. But here they are saying it do only weekly. Similarly, there are changes in other case scenario, chronic hypertension, gestational hypertension, and they are showing that chronic hypertension, if you start at 32 weeks, here in COVID-19, they are saying that 36 weeks if patient is not on medication. Gestational hypertension, you do it weekly with home BP monitoring. In preeclampsia also, you do it weekly with home BP monitoring. Chronic kidney disease, there are no change in recommendation. IUGR, you do it weekly with Doppler. And if you are doing ultrasound, then combine it with biophysical profile. No need to do NST separately. Then so same thing in elevated Doppler. So you have to follow the routine recommendations only. No change in the COVID pandemic.
In cholestasis, there has been no change, but otherwise we are all reducing the frequency.
Yes. Like in SLE also no changes, fetal arrhythmia no changes. They are showing like obesity and BMI low risk patients. In that fetal kick count is enough. Patient with oligohydramnios, you have to follow the routine recommendation. You have to do it once weekly. Polyhydramnios patient, you do it at the time of diagnosis, then once weekly, but they say at the time of diagnosis or 32 weeks, if less than 32 weeks diagnosis, only for AFI more than 30, they are saying, not like 20 or 25. So again, there are no changes. If patient is more than 40 weeks, then no change, routine recommendations. Prior IUFD, no changes. Sickle cell disease, fetal kick count is enough, and single umbilical artery also fetal kick count is enough for monitoring.
So very detailed recommendations for each and every condition. Now coming to our ICMR guidelines. According to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, there is a list of patients who to test for COVID-19. Tomorrow in your clinic, if somebody walks in with a history of say just fever or cold or cough, what will you do? In case a pregnant woman who has an acute respiratory illness with history of travel abroad for the last 14 days, close contact with somebody like who is a proven positive patient, or she herself is a healthcare worker, or contact with someone who has been hospitalized with a respiratory illness. In these are the women who should be tested for COVID-19. A pregnant woman who is presently asymptomatic tested between 5 and 14 days of coming into the direct contact. High risk contact of an individual who has been tested positive. And remember the tests that we are doing. What are these tests? They are the RT-PCR, reverse transcriptase PCR test. Because this test is positive 5 days almost after the exposure till a period of 28 days. And we are the IgG and IgM tests, which are positive from 7 days after exposure. These tests are not approved by ICMR. Are not approved as yet. The approval is pending. So specifically, these hotspots have been identified. I mean, in each of your city, you can search for the hotspot. If your patient is coming from that hotspot or cluster, in that case, you must do COVID-19 test for her. In all symptomatic influenza-like illness, for example, if somebody has fever, cough, cold, runny nose, that is presumed to be, could be because of COVID-19, and the test must be done. So within 7 days, it is RT-PCR, and after 7 days, it is that the antibody rises, although these tests right now have not been validated by the ICMR. And how will we do the test? Most commonly in New Delhi, I can tell you how the tests are being done. We are taking a swab. So like a simple cotton swab is taken from the nose and it is taken from the throat. So nasopharyngeal swab specimen, it is detected by reverse transcriptase real-time PCR reaction. It has to be sent at 4 degrees. So you have to immediately put the swab in a liquid media, and then that is wrapped in a parcel which is 4 degrees ice, and it is sent. Remember, there can be a false negative rate of almost 30% even with 2 serial swabs. And in the near future, NAT or serological testing, serology, in fact, faster and cheaper, may be the method of choice to be used.
So what is the normal course of COVID-19 in pregnancy? So whatever till the data which has been studied, it was found that most women have mild or moderate cold flu-like symptoms. And other reported case of even COVID-19 pneumonia pregnancies were very mild and with good recovery. Women who were found to have severe disease were those who had associated comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, BMI more than 40, or any associated respiratory disease like asthma, or were of advanced age. There have been case reports published of women with severe COVID-19, and there was one published case where it was found that a woman was admitted 34 weeks in ICU with multiple organ dysfunction and ARDS, and she required extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. So data from Australia have identified that there are significant increase in critical illness in later pregnancy compared with early pregnancy. And this was a meta-analysis done, a study was done in USA, and a very recent study, and they studied 41 COVID positive pregnant women, And it was found that approximately 40%, 41% of the women suffered from preterm birth, premature pre-labor rupture of membrane, approximately 18.8%, 13.6% had preeclampsia, 91% were delivered by cesarean, and the baby 2.4% had stillbirth, 10% were admitted to NICU, and 2.4% neonatal death was reported. So the conclusion of the study was that this data was from a small number, and it was related to severe maternal illness. Women were mostly intubated. The women who underwent this had these complications were intubated, and they suggested that may not be linked to direct fetal or neonatal infection with the coronavirus.
So as we see, cesarean is almost 90%. So the labor now recommendation is that it should be a short labor,
Yes.
and a higher incidence of cesarean sections. Definitely the incidence is going to rise.
So coming to the effect on fetus, earlier there were a lot of reports suggesting that the virus may not be transmitted vertically, but there was a recent study which was done in Wuhan in China by Dong, and they studied 33 women. Out of those 33 women, 4 of the newborns had respiratory distress, and out of those 4, 3 were COVID positive. These newborns had all these 3 newborns were found to be positive for coronavirus, and this was after they had taken all the preventive and precautionary measures to prevent the external transmission of the coronavirus from mother to the baby. So this study suggested that virus may be transmitted vertically to the babies.
Almost 9% of cases. So you can expect maternal fetal transmission, according to this paper, to be in the region of 9%.
And then there was a study which was done by Chen et al, and they found no evidence of coronavirus in amniotic fluid or cord blood of 6 of the infants of the infected women.
So this is a much smaller paper, but they did not find any sign of vertical transmission in this. So currently we believe there is inadequate data on COVID-19. Inadequate data, whether it is associated with increased risk of miscarriage, congenital anomalies, does it cause fetal growth restriction? Data from the previous SARS epidemic, that is the data that we are using to predict, and that is reassuring, suggests that there is no increased risk of fetal loss, congenital anomalies associated with pregnancy, especially in the early part. And the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has come up with guidelines in case any patient tests COVID-19 positive. So according to these guidelines, these patients are divided into 3 groups based on their symptoms. So that is the mild case, which is handled at a CCC, that is COVID Care Center, a moderate case, which is handled at COVID Health Center, and a severe case where you need an ICU, so that is a specifically dedicated COVID hospital.
So based on these symptoms, patient might, if a patient is seen at fever clinic, or the patient is having a travel history or any history with contact, then based on their symptoms, they are dividing into 3 groups: mild, only fever; moderate, where there is mild to moderate pneumonia; and severe, the patient is in hypoxia, respiratory rate is more than 30, oxygen saturation is below 90. So accordingly, the patient then is divided into 3. They are advised to go to these dedicated facilities, and then they are all tested for COVID-19. So if the test comes negative, then they can be discharged and managed symptomatically in the first group. If they come positive, then there is a separate section which is called confirmed case section of COVID Care Center. They are sent there, and then they are managed accordingly. Similarly to the group 2, if the patient is negative, then they are shifted to non-COVID hospital blocks and managed according to the clinical assessment. If they come positive, then they are again shifted to confirmed case section of dedicated COVID health centers, and they are monitored. And if their condition worsen, then they might have to shift them to dedicated hospital. Similarly, in the most severe group, if they are negative, they are managed according to their clinical assessment, observed for infection, and all the preventive measures and treatments are given. And patients who are comes positive, they remain in COVID-19 ICU and managed according to the clinical protocol. So the ANC care in COVID positive asymptomatic patient. Like if a patient comes COVID positive but the patient is asymptomatic, so what ANC care do we need to do the routine test? So it should be delayed until the patient recovers completely. But there are certain tests which can't be delayed. There are certain obstetric care like an AMLE scan which can't be delayed. So if it is deemed that the patient can't wait for, if patient is 17 weeks, patient can wait for another 2 weeks, and an AMLE scan can be done up till 21 weeks. So if it is deemed that obstetric care cannot be delayed until after the period of isolation, infection prevention and control measures should be arranged locally to facilitate care, preferably at the end of the working day. And if the ultrasound equipment is used, this should be decontaminated after use in line with national guidelines. So if the patient comes COVID positive but is not in labor, then there are two types of management. One is like patient is symptomatic, she is in distress, she is in respiratory distress, so we need to give a medical treatment. And she's not alone, she also has a baby inside, so we need to do fetal surveillance also. So the medical treatment includes supportive therapy, rest, oxygen supplementation, fluid management, nutritional care. It is recommended that maternal oxygen saturation should be maintained more than or greater than 95%. Fetal surveillance, so like American guidelines, they are suggesting of a COVID positive patient not in labor, how to do fetal surveillance. So they are suggesting a Bluetooth enabled external fetal monitor. If you have heard of Monica Novi wireless patch system, where the patient herself attaches the leads to her belly, and the NST trace comes on the laptop or the tablet of the consulting physician. So from from a distance, the fetal heart rate can be monitored for such patients. Then if the patient is fever, paracetamol is definitely drug of choice. If she has secondary bacterial infection, then pregnancy safe medications are advised. What about the medications to manage pregnancy complications? So the more very important medication that we commonly use in pregnancy are steroids, then tocolytics and magnesium sulfate if the patient is delivering before 32 weeks of pregnancy. So now these are all very dicey situations. The steroids, as we have seen that the studies have shown that steroids have a very negative impact on the overall outcome in the coronavirus infection. They can have negative effect. They can increase its pathology. It increases its course, negative course. Then it is magnesium sulfate can also is a respiratory depressant. So if the patient is below 32 weeks and has mild to moderate symptoms, then steroids are indicated. But if the patient is having severe respiratory distress, severe coronavirus infection, then before giving steroids, we should discuss with pulmonary team, critical care team. Again, between 30 to 34 weeks, mild, moderate symptoms, we can consider use of steroids, but in severe disease, we should preferably avoid. Above 34 weeks, completely avoid the steroids. Similarly, for tocolytics, indomethacin is not recommended because they say NSAIDs have a negative impact on coronavirus pathology. So nifedipine should be used instead of indomethacin. Similarly, magnesium sulfate below 32 weeks, mild to moderate, should use. But if the disease is severe, should discuss with a multidisciplinary team before using it.
So a change in the guidelines here would be that after 34 weeks, no steroids.
After 34 weeks, no steroids.
And also not indicated to use anything like indomethacin or magnesium sulfate.
Yes, unless it is like below 32 weeks and patient is in mild condition. So there are specific medications which have been published in different studies and which have been used at different setups to treat coronavirus infection. And some of them suggested, some of these suggested medicines are hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. At different doses, hydrochloroquine has been suggesting a dose of 600 milligram, 200 milligram thrice a day, and azithromycin 500 milligram once a day for 10 days. And in one study, it showed a virological cure on day 6 of the treatment, 100% of treated patients. An alternative regimen which has been recommended was hydroxychloroquine to be given 400 milligram twice a day on day 1 and then 400 milligram once a day for next 4 days. Similarly, there is one antiviral combination, lopinavir, ritonavir, twice daily for 14 days. Although there was in a study no difference in time to clinical improvement was found. Side effect which has been suggested with chloroquine has been QT prolongation, particularly as well as cardiomyopathy and retinal toxicity. pregnancy. So published clinical data is limited on both the medications.
Post-recovery follow-up, all the scheduled antenatal care which falls within the isolation period should be rearranged. So please do not book those visits. The patient requires hospitalization for severe illness. Ultrasound for fetal growth surveillance is recommended 14 days after the illness resolves. And there is no evidence that fetal growth restriction is a risk for COVID-19. That is why the ultrasound is not indicated. And 2/3 of the pregnancies where SARS was affected by fetal growth retardation, and in that the placental abruption occurred. This was we are talking historically about the previous Middle East respiratory syndrome cases. Now about labor and management. So what we have taken here are the maternal fetal medicine, MFM fetal guidelines from the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology.
Coming to the timing of delivery, in most women with non-severe illness, delivery is not indicated. But what about a patient who is critically ill, intubated, pregnant? So definitely being pregnant puts an extra pressure on the pulmonary system. So there is two school of thoughts. One, there are a group of people who suggest that more than 32 weeks delivery may relieve the extra metabolic and pulmonary load. But if you're delivering at more than 32 weeks, you're planning a cesarean section, you should also take the, it may actually worsen the systemic status because we are doing a surgical intervention. So risk versus benefits should be weighed in for such patients. Mode of delivery, again, it should not be influenced because the patient has corona infection. Only for obstetric and medical indication, the mode of delivery is decided. In labor triage, normally a patient who presents with in labor, a protocol should already be in place in every maternity unit to receive pregnant women in labor or suspected labor with confirmed suspected COVID-19 infection. Women should ideally call in advance to alert the maternity unit about her arrival. And when receiving such patients, there should be precautions should be taken for transmission prevention. You should designate a room or a section of floor for use for a suspected or confirmed COVID-19 patient. Respiratory precautions should be taken. Ideally, they say that negative pressure rooms is best, but if it's not there, it is not an absolute must. Personal protection equipment should be used. Minimize the change in provide and designate one team for COVID-19 patients. So this is from RCOG. They have uploaded a video also on their site how to don and doff the personal protection equipment. It should be a face visor, then a respirator, FFP3 respirator, long sleeved. It should be water resistant, a complete long sleeves gloves. Everything should be worn, and this is before you commit to any procedure which has aerosol generation, which is commonly seen in labor. It is very important that you wear this protective gear before attending to the patient. So the other precautions for transmission prevention is birth attendants should be limited to one named contact. There should be a separate delivery room and operation theater. Neonatal resuscitation corners should be located at least 2 meters away from the delivery table, and patients should wear mask during labor and delivery. Once the patient comes in the labor room at first arrival, full maternal fetal assessment should be done. Assessment of severity of COVID-19. She is not just pregnant, she is suffering from corona infection. So should be seen by pulmonary critical care team. Maternal observation, including temperature, respiratory rate, oxygen saturation, CTG for fetal surveillance, and inform anesthetist and neonatologist. When the patient is in labor, continue with the maternal vital monitoring as well as, in addition, hourly oxygen saturation. Oxygen therapy is indicated only for maternal reason to keep oxygen saturation more than 94%. RCOG recommends continuous electronic fetal monitoring. The idea principle is to shorten the time to delivery. Oxytocin augmentation should be done. If there is a slow labor or dysfunctional labor, you can do an early amniotomy. Care during labor is if the patient is becoming hypoxic, an individualized decision to shorten the second stage of labor with elective instrumental birth in symptomatic women can be taken. In case the patient's symptoms are deteriorating, then you can take a decision for emergency cesarean birth. All care should be taken to reduce the need for blood transfusion. In addition to standard oxytocin, consideration should be made for prophylactic tranexamic acid and misoprostol 400 microgram buccally. Avoid delayed cord clamping. Now there is a controversy. ACOG says avoid delayed. Immediate cord clamping should be done. RCOG recommends delayed clamping. And the ACOG says that cord blood banking can be done because there was no study found which was where the coronavirus was seen in the cord blood. Coming to anesthesia concentration, patient ideally should be given an early epidural to minimize the need for GA in the event of emergency cesarean section. And COVID-19 is not an contraindication to neuroaxial anesthesia. IV analgesia shouldn't be avoided. GA, if considered, it is an aerosolizing procedure, so should be avoided and protective gear should be worn. Coming to the after the birth of the baby, CDC recommends that the babies should be evaluated. Mother with suspected COVID-19 and unknown test results, either pending or not. Infants born to such women are not COVID-19 suspects. But mothers with known COVID-19 infants are COVID-19 suspects and they should be tested, isolated from other healthy infants, cared for according to infection control precautions for patients. Coming to the neonatal care of COVID positive patients, there is no evidence of COVID-19 transmission through breast milk. However, given the risk of neonatal morbidity from transmission through maternal exposure, CDC recommends separation of mother and neonate after discussion with mother. I mean, it is not mandatory, but if it should be a shared decision. Separation is not required if infant tests positive. RCOG and FOXI recommends breastfeeding with discussion of risk factors.
So here there is a separation where the ACOG says separate and RCOG and FOXI recommendations are that we should not separate and continue with routine breastfeeding, which is even encouraged. In fact, the CDC recommends that during this temporary separation, the women who intend to breastfeed should be encouraged to express the breast milk and maintain the milk supply. Before expressing the milk, they have to, of course, practice the appropriate hand and skin hygiene and also breast hygiene. Now, what should be this period of separation? According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, until the patient is afebrile for 72 hours without antipyretics, her respiratory symptoms are improved, and at least 2 consecutive swab tests more than 24 hours have come negative. The precautions to practice for breastfeeding are to wash hands before touching the baby, breast pump bottles, avoid coughing or sneezing on the baby while feeding, consider to wear a face mask if available while feeding or caring for the baby. Where a breast pump is used, follow the recommendations for the pump cleaning and consider asking somebody else who is well to feed the baby on your behalf. For the postnatal care, continued medical evaluation for respiratory status and symptoms and standard practices of routine postnatal care should be followed with hygiene related to puerperium and hand hygiene. Advice on management of engorged breast where the breastfeeding is not established. Measures to enhance breastfeeding is absolutely fine, can be used. Healthy and nutritious diet to build the immunity.
Coming to the postpartum care in non-COVID patients in current scenario, the plan should be principle should be to expedite the discharge planning. All vaginal delivery should have a goal of discharge on postpartum day 1 or even same day if possible for selected women. All cesarean delivery should have a goal of discharge on post-operative day 2 with consideration of postpartum day 1 discharge if meeting the milestones. Discuss anticipated maternal discharge with pediatrics, neonatology to determine the timing of infant discharge. Home care with supplies of blood pressure follow will be critical in discharge of patients with hypertensive disorders. Investigational approach to treatment. So there are, as we discussed, there are a lot of investigational approaches going on. We discussed hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, lopinavir. So there are other drugs which are currently under investigation. One of them is redesivir. It is a nucleotide analog that has activity against SARS-CoV-2 in vitro. It is an IV agent, and systematic evaluation of the clinical impact of redesivir on COVID-19 has not yet been published. Another agent is interleukin-6 pathway inhibitor. We read earlier that it is the main problem causing in the pathogenesis of coronavirus. So there are drugs on the way to for use as interleukin-6 pathway inhibitors. Then there is one therapy which is currently very much in news, that is convalescent plasma. So a case series described administration of plasma from donors who had completely recovered from COVID-19 to 5 patients with severe COVID-19 on mechanical ventilation and persistently high viral titer despite investigational antiviral treatment. The patients had decreased nasopharyngeal viral load, decreased disease severity score, and improved oxygenation by 12 days after transfusion, but these findings do not establish a causal effect. Finding appropriate donors and establishing testing to confirm neutralizing activity of plasma may be of logistic challenge. So this was still under research. Many, especially in USA, they are planning to start this very soon, the use of convalescent plasma.
So in Kerala also, I think the trials are to be, ICMR has asked for approval from the DGCI, Directorate Control of Drugs of India, and around 16,000 rupees is going to be the approximate cost for the plasma. Now, coming to one other aspect, so there might be some patients who might call you for an MTP. They want MTP or patients with who need abortion care services. Now, RCOG has published very good guidelines for this. So according to these, abortion is actually an essential part of healthcare for women. This service has to be maintained even when non-urgent or other elective services are suspended. It is time-sensitive. Attention has to be paid to providing care as early as possible, given the gestational limits. And this organized access to abortion care so that the delay has to be minimized. Now, in a person who has a history of cold, cough, fever, or a contact or a travel, that you maybe suspect, or the person is confirmed COVID-19, if the woman requires a face-to-face assessment, but the pregnancy is likely that it is less than 20 weeks of gestation, then the care should be booked at least 7 days after the illness has started. And in case of suspected or confirmed COVID-19, if the woman is suitable for an early medical abortion at home, she should be advised to take this approach if she has no or mild symptoms. A persistent cough is considered to be acceptable as a no or mild symptom, and before pregnancy reaches 10 weeks. So medical abortion before 10 weeks of pregnancy. If the abortion cannot be safely deferred and face-to-face contact is necessary, request the woman to attend the clinic at one particular time, like at the end of your day clinic OPD, at a location which is equipped to manage COVID-19 patients. So correct infection prevention control measures can be put into place, and she should be given a surgical mask and asked to wash her hands when she comes. If surgical abortion is done, do vacuum aspiration under local anesthesia, IV sedation. Please avoid general anesthesia. Consider even spinal anesthesia or IV sedation, which is more appropriate in this setting. In case of suspected or confirmed COVID-19, they say to even check clotting profile along with the CBC and blood group. Ensure that the best practices followed to reduce the risk of transmission and infection. So limit the number of people in the theater. Everybody should use personal protective equipment. Decontaminate the whole area. This PHE is Public Health England. So we should follow the decontamination guidelines as per our government. And self-isolation due to contact with suspected COVID-19, the same practices as described for suspected cases. Now, it is especially important to reduce the contact during COVID-19 pandemic. So this is something different. One extra dose of 400 microgram of misoprostol has been advised 4 hours after the your routine protocol, so that the abortion is complete and the contact is reduced. Now, what if the woman has pain after she takes the medication? So there is evidence that NSAIDs like ibuprofen 400 or 800 milligram are effective. And also there is good evidence that paracetamol may not be very effective. However, in cases of this current COVID pandemic, paracetamol should be used in preference with ibuprofen. Ibuprofen can be used in other circumstances, but in this case, use paracetamol. Now, in our Indian context, remember that MTP medicine comes under Schedule H medicine. You cannot really prescribe it to the person on the phone or on telemedicine. You have to have a face-to-face because you have to get the consent form signed. So you have to follow everything as per the MTP Act. I mean, it is not acceptable that you will do it on the phone without signing the consent forms. So you must do a phone triage, call the patient, get the consent form signed, and then prefer to do a medical termination. Now, in fact, if you have to do a surgical termination after 12 weeks, I put up this circular which has just come to all of us here in Noida, that we must do the COVID test for every woman before you take her for any surgical procedure. This is a new circular which has come. What happens in Delhi is that we don't have to do the COVID test. And I thank Dr. Kishore Rajurkar here from Sanjay Gandhi Hospital, because he told me what is happening in their government setups is that at the entrance of the hospital, a complete evaluation is done. Does she have influenza-like illness, travel history, contact with somebody, or she's from a hotspot area? You know, you look for these hotspot areas. Is she from there? And then after that, you decide whether she needs to do the COVID-19 test or not. So it is not to be done routinely for all. Now, one last scenario comes of ectopic pregnancy. In ectopic pregnancy, I'm sorry for the typo error here, but what it says is avoid absolutely laparoscopy is not acceptable at this time. And if at all surgical management, it has to be by mini laparotomy. Preference should be given to medical management. Now, again, with medical management with methotrexate, there is a concern that methotrexate is immunosuppressant. So does the woman have to go in self-isolation when she has taken methotrexate? So what is being suggested is that these are the British guidelines, that it's approximately like 1 or 2 off doses of women, and these women generally have healthy immune systems. So it is not required that the woman goes in self-isolation after methotrexate, but there is a rare case that the WBC counts can fall. So you must keep a follow-up. And what should you do for yourself? So don't forget yourself when you are treating. Now, this is very busy presentation here, but basically there is a guideline which has been given on the use of hydroxychloroquine. Is a drug of choice. It is available free for healthcare workers in government setups. And what they should use is 400 milligram 2 times a day on day 1 and 400 milligram once in a week for the next 7 weeks, and take it always with meals. So this is the guidelines for healthcare workers as per the National Task Force for COVID-19. Now there's another controversial issue of a consent form. Should you take a special consent when you are doing a delivery or you are doing treating somebody with ectopic pregnancy? That the special consent is that this is the time of a pandemic. And also there is a declaration form. So this is a bit controversial. Some of us follow, some don't. For our practice, we actually in Delhi, most of the hospitals are doing this. We are taking declaration forms. We are signing a special consent form for whatever it's worth. So thank you everybody very much for being with us today on a Sunday afternoon. And we are now come to the end of the webinar. Thank you.
I'd like to thank both our speakers for such a wonderful lecture. You have covered each and every aspect of obstetrical care in an elaborate way. I hope audience has gained a lot of insights. I'd like to thank all our participants for taking their time out for this webinar. Now, madam, we have some questions for you. Can I take these questions, madam?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just a minute. This is Dr. Varsha Shivaji Lahade. She's asking, Dr. Shubhangi Mundada, what about low dose aspirin in COVID?
Yeah, so
low dose aspirin can be continued. As for low dose aspirin was for preeclampsia preventive measures. So earlier there was like NSAIDs should be given or not during COVID. So WHO has recommended can be given, and there is no negative effect till now. No negative effect has been seen, so they can be continued for preeclampsia prophylaxis.
Okay.
This is specifically mentioned in those guidelines that it can be continued. So we don't think that there should be any problem with aspirin.
Okay. Now, next question is from Dr. Ritu Santwani. She's asking, breastfeeding is allowed to COVID positive mother?
See, again, this is a shared decision. We have to explain to the mother that there are risks that she's COVID positive and she may transmit the infection to the newborn. First of all the newborns are tested for COVID themselves. And till CDC says till their result comes, they should be separated and isolated from the healthy newborns. And if it comes positive anyway, then she can feed the baby. But if it comes negative, then it is you have to discuss with the mother the risk and benefits. So there are different school of thoughts. As we discussed, RCOG says that the advantages of breastfeeding are such that every woman, every newborn should be allowed to have bonding and breastfeeding from the mother. But the mother should take proper precaution. Both mother and baby should be wearing protective gear, and mother should follow all the measures with respect to hand sanitization, washing of the breast also before starting feeding. But CDC and American guidelines, they say that baby should be kept separate, and ideally, because there is no virus in the breast milk, they should do breast pumping, and the feeding can be done by some other caregiver who is non-COVID so that they can feed the baby that breast milk in a separate room to avoid contact with the mother. So, it's a discussion between the doctor and the mother, what she decides. If she elects or she chooses to breastfeed the baby, it's her choice, but she should take all the precautions.
Okay. Next question is from Dr. Biswajit. He's asking, any infertility patient, for any infertility patient, can we do IVF or IUI at this time?
So the ASRM guidelines, in fact, most of the international guidelines are saying that you cannot start any elective IVF procedure. The only procedure you can start is in case of egg freezing or embryo freezing for somebody with malignancy. That is for fertility preservation. That is the only exception to this rule. Apart from that, fresh cycle, frozen embryo transfer cycle are all suspended.
Okay. Madam, next question is from Dr. Tarini. She is asking, if the patient is of IUGR, how many visits you plan?
So for IUGR patients, initially, as we discussed, the visits, what we were recommending was at 28 weeks, then 32 weeks, then 36 weeks. So every 4 weeks they are recommending. As per American guidelines, they are saying that IUGR baby ultrasound monitoring as well as the NST, it has to be go as per routine recommendations only. So every 4 weeks at 28 weeks, then 32 weeks with NST once weekly or twice weekly, as we do normal routinely. We should follow that same routine in IUGR patients.
Okay. Next question is from Dr. Amrita Jaipuriar. She is asking suggestions for a woman with hypertension, hypothyroidism, and diabetes regarding conception and pregnancy at this time.
So they plan to get pregnant.
Yeah, preconceptional care.
See, such patients who are planning pregnancy, the advice would be to avoid getting pregnant at this point of time. Yeah. Because we know that the pregnancy, every patient, including us, we are at risk of contracting infection. That's why government has ordered a lockdown. So during this lockdown period, what we should follow is we should follow all the possible precautions to prevent acquiring infection. So what we are doing is maintaining a social distancing. If patient is already a high risk, as you are saying, hypothyroid, diabetic, and hypertension, she is a very immunosuppressed patient. Her whole profile suggests that she should not conceive at this point of time unless this peak of coronavirus subsides.
Okay. Now, next question is from Dr. Jaldhara. She's asking recommendations for routine vaccination like DTaP, flu vaccine. Can we recommend this?
We should continue, correct. So we have put up the fetal medicine guidelines, FMM guidelines. So according to those, the Tdap vaccination, the routine vaccination definitely should be given, and even RhoGAM should be given. You shouldn't worry that such a vaccine will cause an immunocompromise and avoid the vaccine. This question has been specifically addressed by them. They should be given.
Madam, Dr. Ritu again asking a question. What additional precautions in COVID positive patient with PROM?
In
PROM.
PROM.
Yeah.
If patient is already like ruptured membrane.
Early delivery.
Yeah.
As soon as possible, augmentation, higher incidence of C-section, cesarean section, and complete avoidance of any general anesthetic procedures. Completely avoid aerosols. It is not at all to be preferred.
Yeah, considering the time, I will take this as the last question, madam, from Dr. Ravindra Kuthe. He is asking follow-up of non-COVID patient. What are the preferred antibiotics and role of BCG?
For non-COVID patients, postpartum care.
Follow-up of non-COVID patient, preferred antibiotics and role of BCG.
See, if a patient is non-COVID, when we are discharging the patient has delivered or by C-section, what we can do is we can prescribe all the hematinics, calcium supplements, painkillers, everything at one shot, and rest of the patient consultation can do it from home. Patient can do, and
so
when
we postnatal visit.
Yeah, postnatal visit. We can use self-absorbable sutures to avoid again another visit while the patient is getting getting discharged, we can do a check dressing to avoid all the antibiotics. If the patient is hypertensive, they can monitor blood pressure at home. So the follow-up visits need not be done. They can do teleconsultation.
Specifically, also, if there is any change in antibiotics because of the COVID-19 situation after delivery, there is no change. As far as we have read the guidelines, it says that there is you continue with your routine antibiotics. You don't need to change those antibiotics. Is that covered all the questions?
Madam, there are many questions, but because of the lack of time, I will not be able to take those. Last question from my end. What about can you guide us regarding the personal protective equipments which you are using? PPE.
So what we are using here is a kit. We get it for around 800 rupees. If anybody wants, you can, I'm not sure how they can provide elsewhere, but we get a PPE kit in which we have a complete a hood. It's like a hood which covers your face, and we've got glasses, and we've got a face visor in the front, and of course a mask below, gloves, and foot covers. So these are all, and the PPE kit is around 800 rupees disposable. We are not reusing it. We are using it only once and we are disposing it. Now for the baby, there are certain hospitals which also have a visor. We are putting like a face protection for the baby just because that can prevent the main source of contact. But that is up to you. How much equipment you have available and what you use.
Yeah. Madam, in comment section, apart from questions, I am seeing many compliments like excellent lecture. Many aspects are covered. So, so these are the compliments from viewers, ma'am. So
thank you. We are so grateful to all of them. Thank you so much for this, coming and being with us today. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for our speakers and all the participants who have taken their time out for this webinar. I will also like to thank our BU head, Mr. DP Satpathy sir, and our divisional head, Mr. Manish Shah sir, for making this event possible. Have a nice day ahead.
Gratitude from our side also for Mr. Satpathy and Dr. Manish. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.